Okay, hi everyone, it's Shafiq. Welcome back for day 2 of the Social Changemakers Conference. We are so thrilled to have you back again today. Just a quick reminder of our intentions in this space, how we're going to be interacting with each other, and our code of conduct that Maya reviewed with us yesterday evening. So we are going to make sure that we will respect each other, that we will work towards building understanding, and we are making sure that we are always using respectful language and making space for everyone to speak and to be heard.
Awesome. Thank you, Shafiq. So this is Maya speaking. I'm just going to do a quick review of today's schedule. So we've got a few minutes together in this large group space. Then we're going to go back into the same breakout rooms that we were in yesterday with your emerging leaders. Then after a break, we'll come back here to the main room at 3:15 Eastern Time, which is 12:15 Pacific Standard Time, for a special performance, prizes, and a wrap-up. Then, same as yesterday, you can join us on gather.town afterwards for games, networking, escape rooms, and a scavenger hunt. All right, so throughout our large group and small group sessions yesterday, we focused on what it means to have different identities and the impact of storytelling. We want to continue with these themes today and specifically talk about how we can be in solidarity with those who face multiple forms of oppression or discrimination. Being an ally can mean many different things, and here we've outlined a few. It can be standing behind someone or a group who faces discrimination, offering support towards equity-seeking groups, to speak out about social inequities, and staying vigilant and staying informed. Allyship encourages people to speak out about social justices in society, which implicitly raises awareness, which is great. As well, it helps us build bridges between our differences and encourages folks to work together to overcome different forms of discrimination. However, we at Harmony Movement like to challenge the concept of allyship. We don't deny that it's great and an amazing stepping stool into social justice work. We just believe that there are a few things missing and that we can do more. Shafiq will guide us through this understanding.
So as Maya said, allyship is a great introduction to equity work. But since our conference's goal is to go beyond the bake sale, we really want to focus on how we can make allyship stronger and how we can move beyond just the word allyship itself. So to go beyond allyship, we first have to identify what is missing. So when we think about engaging in allyship work, a lot of people see it as viewing it as a checklist, right? And so what that means is that when they go about their event or their workday or their daily life, they see and view typical equity-driven actions as something they can do and then sort of check off and then be done with. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding sticking to that and being limited by that view. As well, some folks call themselves allies, sometimes for the wrong reasons. So we are mainly referring to companies here that engage in equity work when it is convenient for them. I'm sure most of you see during June, which is Pride Month, that a lot of major corporations and banks change their profile pictures to a rainbow. And that only really happens during that month of June, right? So a lot of these times, these companies will promote allyship and equity on their profiles and call themselves allies, more so to gain clients than anything else. So when in reality, they're not changing systemic issues that affect 2S LGBTQIA+ employees that work for them. And lastly, allyship does not call for sustained work. It's not necessarily a fundamental part of allyship. So as stated earlier, it can sometimes feel like a one and done event. So we really want to encourage everybody here to move past this mentality and to start talking about how we can incorporate an equity framework or lens into our daily lives and to stay committed to that work. So moving forward, we want to think about how we can be in solidarity with folks who face discrimination rather than simply being an ally to them. So solidarity work can look different for many different people, right? Here are some ways that we have on the screen how you might start to move beyond that simple definition and that limited way of showing allyship. So one, we want to encourage everybody to speak out when you hear someone say something problematic, whether it's comfortable or sometimes it could be a little bit tricky or uncomfortable. So if there's a racist remark, somebody says something homophobic, transphobic, they use terms that discriminate against other identity groups, for example, being ableist. We really want to make sure that we are intervening whenever it is possible and ensuring that person understands what was wrong with what they might have said. What's even more important is intervening when someone from that particular identity group who's being spoken about isn't necessarily present. We can think that if that person isn't in that space, we might let ourselves off the hook for saying problematic things because we think that they're not there, so they won't be impacted. But it's really important to know that that impact is definitely still there. And even if the person isn't with you, it's very significant to present those challenges and to intervene and let that person know what they said was wrong and why it was wrong. So secondly, you can also be in solidarity with identity groups that you don't personally identify with. For example, just because if you are a person that's not Black, maybe you're white or a person of color, doesn't mean that you can't believe that Black Lives Matter or to go to protests supporting Wet'suwet'en land defenders. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Even if you don't belong to that personal identity group, your voice and your solidarity matters. So standing in solidarity with these groups doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be part of them yourself. And lastly, it's important to ask yourself these two questions when engaging in solidarity work. What is my relationship to the issue? So for example, is it impacting you? Perhaps a friend or a partner or a colleague that you work with? What kind of position do you have in relation to that issue generally? And how can you relate to that problem based on your identity and your experiences? And the other question that we want to ask ourselves is, based on that relationship, what is the best and most impactful thing that I can do? So it might look like, speaking out and, uplifting others' voices, presenting challenges when people from those communities are not there, right? So there's many things that we can do to make sure that we are not taking a one and done kind of approach to equity work. Now, we recognize that sometimes it can feel a bit daunting to work in solidarity with groups consistently that you don't belong to, especially if your own family members or perhaps your ancestors may have directly influenced issues that affect that group or have led to systems of oppression or discrimination that continue to affect those people. However, it is important to remember that you can still be in solidarity with these groups. And this is especially true because all of our struggles are fundamentally linked together. Forms of oppression don't exist individually or in silos. There is always a larger system at play. So when you are acting in solidarity, for example, with folks that are homeless or underhoused, asking for affordable housing, you're also in solidarity with other groups that might be impacted by that issue, like racialized groups, for example, who face discrimination in job hiring processes or applying for housing. And lastly, it's really important to remind ourselves that while it's important to celebrate the big wins and the little wins that you face, that this work is not ever going to be finished until everyone is free from oppression. And I know that sounds a bit daunting sometimes, but it really is important for us to remind ourselves that although we're making progress and we are creating changes, and that's exactly why all of us are here today, that we always have to strive to go beyond a limited understanding of what that could mean and how those impacts can change the society around us. To be in solidarity means to recognize that although you are not being oppressed or discriminated against directly yourself, that other folks are, and they definitely are being impacted by it. Being in solidarity means that you want to work with them, you want to stand with them and be with them, you want to fight with them so they can be free of this discrimination too. And there's so many amazing ways that we're seeing solidarity work happening all across Canada. These past couple of years, we've seen so many issues coming up, whether that be trying to address concerns around police brutality and the Black Lives Matter protest that has emerged as a result and grown really large and covers the world now. Whether we see people addressing violence and hate towards our East Asian community in response to the frustrations of the pandemic. And we're also seeing that people are gathering all across the country to show their solidarity with Indigenous communities and the struggles that they are facing in relation to environmental discrimination. So what we have on the screen here is a couple examples of protests that have happened in cities across the country, whether that be in Vancouver or Victoria, in Winnipeg, in Toronto, in Ottawa, in Quebec City, all across Canada. We've been seeing that people have been coming out to raise the voices and highlight the issue of the fact that Canada is trying to build a pipeline through Indigenous territories, and that nation is not in agreement with the pipeline being built. So in relation to this issue that's happening in British Columbia, Wet'suwet'en land defenders have seen support across the country. I've had the really awesome opportunity to go out to a couple of these events that have been happening in Toronto. And at the core of the demands from people who are showing their solidarity to this Indigenous nation is demanding an end to the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's invasion of that nation's land, as well as the Canadian government's response, which has been very violent against this specific community. So when we think about what it means to stand in solidarity, we remember that using this example, we remember that these issues are not a one and done, right? We can't just have a single protest in solidarity in Toronto and think we did our jobs and we can go home now and we're okay. We have to remember that at the core of solidarity is collectivity, which means many people coming together, working in unity towards a single goal or a single set of goals. And this is an image that has been used for more than 100 years all across the world. It has a lot of history behind it. But of course, as we can understand what solidarity really means, the core of it means collectivity, unity, and working together to make the changes that we want to see in this society and in this world. So when we really consider solidarity, this is something that we want everybody to keep in mind as we continue to discuss these equity topics, as we have all of you folks over the next few weeks going back to your schools and communities and starting to do planning around how to try to make social change in your schools or in your communities. So I will pass it over back to Janelle.
Thank you, Shafiq. Hi, folks. Janelle speaking. I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker for the day, Thomas Reid. So shortly after becoming blind in 2004, Thomas Reid decided to reignite a dormant interest in audio production. After years of combining his interest in audio with advocacy, in 2014, he launched his podcast, Reid My Mind Radio. The podcast features people impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability. Sometimes he shares stories from his own experience as a man adjusting to becoming blind as an adult. His early days of adjustment helped him understand the importance of meeting people who were also experiencing blindness, realizing that not everyone has access to people living full, meaningful lives with their disability. He set out to develop his skill of pairing narrative storytelling with music and sound design to address all sorts of topics from a pro-disability social model point of view. He sprinkles in humor, analysis, and opinion from his multidimensional perspective to spark thoughtful conversations among his listeners. Whether in his role as an audio producer, voiceover artist, audio description narrator, and advocate, Thomas continues to use his voice to change perspectives around blindness and disability. So we welcome you to put your virtual hands together for Thomas Reid. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you great.
Great. So just want to say that it is really an honor to be here, to have an opportunity to share my thoughts and my opinions with young people generally. So for those in leadership at Harmony Movement, to entrust me with this task, I take that very seriously, and I'm honored and I'm thankful. So thank you for that. I was invited to discuss what solidarity means to me and how to be in solidarity with the disability community, with specific attention placed on intersections of disability. And I have no idea what that means. I'm just joking with you. So, I play a lot, I'm sorry. But honestly, that topic can get really detailed. And so what I wanted to do, what I want to do is to pick out some things that I think would be of use to this group specifically. And so that's young people in their teens interested in making society a better place. And I like to refer to y'all as the really cool ones, for real. So let me begin with what I truly believe is a form of solidarity, and that's my image description. So I'm a brown-skinned black man with a smooth, clean-shaven bald head, a full beard, wearing dark shades. I have an orange button-down shirt. I'm seated in my vocal booth, which is in my home in the Poconos in Northeast Pennsylvania, which is the original land of the Lenape. We're also only 90 minutes from the place that I always call home, and that's the Bronx, New York. I always have to shout out my Bronx. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So if we even look at my image description right there, right, you can kind of start to see that I'm probably in solidarity with multiple groups or multiple communities there. So my acknowledgement of the original land of the Lenape, the indigenous people, actually like the way Canada usually I hear First Nations, and I really like that term better. So there's some solidarity there, right? I wanted to specifically do that, to acknowledge. The Bronx, New York. I mentioned the Bronx, and I said I always represent for my borough. But now, if you notice, I specifically shout out the Bronx, New York. Now, I could just refer to my specific neighborhood where I grew up, the section of that neighborhood, the specific building, right? I can really kind of zoom in if I wanted to, or go the opposite way, meaning shout out the whole city, the whole state, the whole East Coast if I wanted to, right? So there's some levels that are built into communities, obviously, but then we have to recognize our solidarity in there as well. So the image description itself is censoring those who are blind. Now, first of all, when I say blind, I want everyone to know that I'm including the full spectrum. So people who are totally blind, all the way to those who are low vision, okay? But still considered legally blind. So I have no idea if anyone here today falls into that community outside of myself. I don't know. But I do want you all to be informed, right? And I don't want anyone to specifically have to ask for an image description. I just want to make that available. I don't want anyone to, what does he look like? What's his identity? Those who aren't blind have access to that information, and therefore I believe that why shouldn't everyone, as much as possible? And so the image description is a way of doing that. So I wasn't always in solidarity with the disability community. I can't honestly say that. I wasn't against the community in any way that I recognize. It just wasn't something that wasn't on my radar, right? It just wasn't on there. Not until 2004 when I myself became blind after a second incidence of cancer. And so just as a little bit of background, the first was as a child. I lost my left eye. I was born with this genetic form of childhood eye cancer called retinoblastoma. And I had it in both eyes, but the left was much more aggressive, so that eye was removed. The right eye was treated with lots of radiation. And all of that radiation killed off the cancer and left me with decent vision in my right eye. And so I grew up playing sports and participating in all sorts of activities without any sort of accommodation or noticeable adaptations, right? At the end of 2003, I was diagnosed with an aggressive tumor behind the right eye at this time. And so in 2004, the eye was removed, and obviously I became blind at that point. And so now, at that point, 2004, I was disabled, right? So all I remember thinking about was sort of wanting to feel normal. And when I look back at that now, I think that was probably like some shock there, because I was really just planning on getting right back to work, right? Picking up my life where I left off. I had a wife, I still have a wife, and two young daughters. They're older now. One was just born right prior to my diagnosis. We just moved into a new home, new state, new town, all of that. So becoming disabled, I can't say automatically put me in solidarity with the community. I can't say that at all. It's not true. For me, it began with becoming comfortable with my blindness myself. So for me, that meant learning how to navigate the world as a blind person, learning my technology, other tools that would enable me to independently do the things that I wanted to do. It meant meeting and being in communication with other people who were also experiencing blindness. And initially for this meant finding the right people to listen to have conversations with, to ask questions. These were people that I could relate to, those who I could tell had goals, desires they were working for. They wanted to achieve something in their lives. And so in general, these are the type of people that I always try to be associated with. It's just my personal preference, right? What I think today is that, honestly, I don't think someone can be in solidarity with a community if they're not in solidarity with themselves. And so I had to become comfortable with my blindness in order to be in community. I can't respect you if I don't respect myself. I can't stand up with you or for you if I let people treat me any sort of way, right? I can't show compassion for you if inside I'm beating myself up, calling myself all kinds of names, right? Negative self-talk. For me, standing in solidarity meant becoming aware of the history of blindness and blindness issues, being aware of that, being aware of the politics, being aware of, or even kind of coming up with my own philosophy that agreed, or adopting a philosophy that agreed with my values, my personal values. And that was specifically started with blindness, and then later that meant becoming more familiar with disability in general. Really understanding how to think about the world from multiple perspectives. So to me, that meant increasing my own empathy. Again, I don't think people can be in solidarity with a community if all they know about that community are the stereotypes and the misperceptions, because then they really don't know the community. So to me, these two things, meeting people, hearing their stories, learning about disability culture, disability rights, these were so impactful on my life that today they're a big part of the work I do with the podcast specifically. And yeah, most people adjusting to disability probably won't have a chance to really meet others in a similar position. And so the podcast for me is a way of bridging that gap. It's my personal advocacy. It's my way of actually showing my solidarity with the community. It's my belief in the power of stories and the power of relationships, because that's what's there. It's all about, making people aware of just the dope things that come out of the disability community, honestly. And that is my way of refuting years of misinformation and stereotypes that I unknowingly was consuming on a daily basis all my life. And I think all of us have been consuming that information in some way or another. Again, it's my way of choosing to center our stories and our perspective. When I say our, I'm talking about the disability community and I'll get into that in some of the intersections of that community, right? Some think that disability-related stories are just that. It's just disability, right? Those are specific to that one community. Um, but the things that impact the disability community impact every community. You know, disability intersects with every group imaginable. It doesn't discriminate. So you pull out any whatever, any socioeconomic sector, any marginalized group, disability falls into that. Uh, so the core of my understanding and practice around being in solidarity or working for whatever sort of rights or whatever form of justice, social justice, right? Women's rights, disability justice, civil rights. It's a simple concept to me. I cannot support, rights for one community while opposing those same rights for another community. It just doesn't make sense to me. So my freedom shouldn't be based on denying someone else theirs. My ability to live comfortably doesn't mean someone else needs to go without shelter. My ability to eat should not mean someone else goes hungry. And, in a sense, we see some of this now in terms of the denying, especially here in the States, denying certain groups the right to vote and trying to make that difficult, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't think that we can say we're in solidarity with the disability community without including everyone. Yet we don't often hear from all of those intersections, right? So very similar to just the larger society in general, there's a real lack of representation from BIPOC communities, right? Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's evident in when we look at the outreach that these organizations do to these communities. We don't see the leadership within disability-related organizations. We often just see that to tend to be either white male, white women. It's mainly white male. That's what we see. If we look on print and on the screen, again, we don't see the images. We don't hear our stories being told in that environment. Now, today, I see there's signs of change because we're equipped. We have the ability, we have the technology to tell our stories. You're in a position to tell your stories. And so if we just take those things that I talked about, I want to talk about how you all can apply them to your work, to your lives, and what I think are the most important things there. So first, I think the first thing is be honest with yourself to really, really get to know who you are. Because, you might be in the age where you're learning yourself, and we all say that, and that's definitely true. But I think you already have a really good idea of who you are, right? It's just a matter of, what you like, what you don't like, what interests you. You have an idea of the things that you value, right? Maybe it's all about art. It's music, it's dance, it's something in that area or something, right? So I want to encourage everyone to give this a try. All right, it's something that I kind of came across a few years ago, and I found it very helpful and interesting. It was a self-evaluation test, and the idea that it was really geared toward career, but it helps you, I think, with everything. So it was a series of questions that were designed to be answered honestly by yourself and reveal your interests and your values, right? Those things that are of value to you, that mean something to you. So the assignment was generate a list of 7 times in your life when you can remember doing something and losing yourself in that, losing track of time. And at first, probably like a lot of people, I couldn't think of anything. I was like, I don't know. I don't remember at all. But eventually I thought about it, and I did. And so I came up with the 7, but I want to share 3, and I'll share them quickly. Now, don't judge me, okay? So the first one was I was a paper boy at about 13, 14 years old. And I loved it. Like I built up this business and got my first taste of like making my own money. More importantly, I saw that I was responsible, right? I could do this on my own. So I was delivering every day, all the weather, whatever, it didn't matter. Um, but I also had the ability to knock on a door and expand my business if I wanted to, and I did. Like before that, I was, oh, I'm so shy, I'm so shy. It didn't matter. I did it. That was really, it meant a lot to me at that early age. Um, ooh. So I'm going to skip to my last one. The last one was all about this idea that I had. And at the time, I didn't know something called a multi-track recorder existed, but I weaved this whole elaborate thing together with all of these different devices to make what's a multi-track thing. So I was able to layer audio on top of audio on top of audio, and it was amazing to me. And I literally lost myself. So the end result of me taking this test had more to do with learning my values, right? And that was the things that I was interested in. And let me know that the track that I was on and the things that I wanted to pursue were right in line with my values. And that to me made sense. That to me let me know that I could combine all of my interests with the things that are of importance to me. And that's pretty much the suggestions that I really want to give to y'all, because you have, you know, often when we're younger, sometimes we're told that we should do X, Y, and Z when we're really interested in A, B, and C. But there's ways to combine things, right? Especially if you all are interested in and concerned, and this is fantastic, with social issues and social justice. Like, but let's say you're a writer, you know, you have the opportunity to combine those things. You're a musician, you can do that. Because again, getting to know yourself, in my opinion, is one of the most important things to be in solidarity with anyone. So, you know, pursue your passions on your terms, combine your interests, and I think you'll find yourself able to kind of continue on. So get to know the community that you want to be involved with, educate yourself on that. If it was disability, you know, some might think it's scary, but you're going to come to realize that there's absolutely nothing abnormal about disability. It's 100% part of the human experience. And you'll come to see that barriers that we think about are really more about the society. It's not about the disability. It's about society. It's about misperceptions. It's about just not being included. And understand that conflict is natural. But if your value tells you that you you can't have freedom for yourself without someone else having freedom, then I think that gives you a great place to start with finding solutions that work for everyone. And I think especially in this time, we have that ability more than we believe we do, because because of things like technology, because of just resources, we have that, but too often we're fighting for those. So you know, I think with those things, again, for you all specifically, it's a fantastic way to get started with solidarity, um, and just it's not an exhaustive list. But again, where you are in your life, I believe it's the most important, and it's just taking that first step and be one with yourself and respect and loving that person in the mirror, and put your talents to work for those things that are of value to you. After that, I think you'll build honest and strong relationships with communities, and like I said in the beginning, because I think you all are the absolute cool ones. So I know we don't have that much time, but I wanted to leave some time for questions, and I hope you have some questions.
Awesome. This is Maya speaking. Thank you,
All right.
Thomas, for
Absolutely.
everything that you gave today. I mean, personally, I'm like fangirling because I am a fan of your podcast and I've listened
Oh,
to you speak before. You came to one of my university classes, which was really fun.
cool.
So I just had a quick question for you. So I know you also work, you have part of your podcast, The Young, Gifted, Black, and Disabled. And I was wondering if you could either just talk about that so that folks can hear more about it, and also the solidarity work that goes on within that group.
Yeah, so the Young, Gifted, Black, and Disabled is a series because, we don't get to hear those stories, and that was something that I realized. Well, I'm in a position to tell those. I mean, I think we're all in a position to tell those, but the podcast was growing, and there were more people, and so it's a time where I dedicate, and to be honest with you, well, it's a time that I dedicate to telling those stories of specifically that group: young, gifted, black, and disabled. Now, young is relative. I don't necessarily say that it has to be a young person, because that young could be some. I'm 53 and I think I'm young. Some people might argue with me, whatever. But but I think I'm young, because I still think I have things to do. But it's just a way of highlighting those stories, because again, I think there's so many fascinating things and just cool stuff. You hear from, like some of the ones that I really enjoyed. A gentleman by the name of Latif. Um, he is a nonverbal person with cerebral palsy. He's about to be a professor. Um, and I was just really, to be totally honest with you, I was just really at first interested in the technology that he uses. He has a speech generating device that he uses, and I saw community with him, because to an extent I use a screen reader, and so those synthetic voices, and so I really wanted to be in conversation with him just about that, because that's something that we don't really see the connection often. We see them as one thing and us as one, but we're kind of using a very similar technology. So there's all sorts of people on that. That's something that's going to continue throughout the podcast. That's going to be a regular series, absolutely. But even throughout, I'm highlighting stories. I got something coming up with a young brother, First Nations. He's a rapper. Some of y'all might know him, Matt Mack. He's going to be a part of there's a whole Blind and Famous. They're not going to be on Young, Gifted, Black, but they're going to be on this other one I'm calling Doing Your Thing with Disability. Because a lot of times we get this idea that you have to overcome disability. And no, everything I do, I'm doing it blind. So, yeah.
Ah, for sure. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
If anyone else has any more questions, you can send them in the chat. We have about like 1 to 2 more minutes, so probably just one if we have time. So yeah, or you can either raise your hand and ask a question. Up to you, folks.
Give me a question. I want a question.
Okay, Kate has their hand raised. Kate,
Yay,
you want to
Kate.
unmute?
For sure, yeah. So first of all, thank you, Thomas. That was awesome. I just wanted to know what your opinion was really on like the use of language surrounding disabilities. So I'm a teacher, or soon to be, and I've had a lot of different colleagues really say that they're trying to get away from the word disability, but these colleagues are able-bodied. And so I just wanted to know what really how you felt about the term, if you feel comfortable answering.
Sure.
And where I can kind of go from here.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kate. So I'm on the side of just say the word, because disability is the word. And sort of what I was kind of alluding to in the talk is that, the disability supposed to just kind of describe the fact that my eyes don't work, right? It's not to describe anything else, because it's just that. But what's really disabling about disability is the fact that we have so many blockades that are put up, right, within society in terms of the treatment, in terms of inaccessibility. These are the things that stop folks from, folks getting hired, getting employment has to do more with the lack of accessibility to these things, the misperceptions that folks have, and that's why they're not hired. That has nothing to do with their disability. So changing the word is not for anything that's really intended to help the community. It's more about, to me at least, it feels more about making someone else comfortable around that. Now, I can be totally honest with you, that was not the way I felt when I first became blind. But like I said, my whole adjustment process it's a growth. It is a journey. I've been learning and just kind of viewing things differently. But today, that is 100% my philosophy. It is not the word, because those same people who want to call me something differently abled or whatever the case may be, may still have those same feelings. It does nothing about that. It does nothing about their education. So, yeah, I just think that's something to make folks feel better for themselves.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. And so we have time for one more question, and Christine has their hand up. So Christine, go ahead.
Hi, Thomas.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I did have a question. So as we previously discussed, advocacy work isn't always easy. It can be daunting, emotional, and sometimes very exhausting. How do you strike a balance between taking care of others while also taking care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah, I think again, knowing my value, knowing what I'm here for, knowing what I can do. I can't do everything. I used to be involved with an organization for 12 years, and what happens so often is that you get, a small percentage of people within an organization who do the majority of the work. And some of the work just wasn't my forte. It just wasn't in my interest. Now, it doesn't mean that I only do work within my interest, but it does mean that that's one of those things that I'm not going to find motivating. It's going to turn me off after a while. And so that's one of the things that I do now. I really want to stick close to what I know I can be of
Mhm.
help with, because I can't help everybody with everything. I mean, I'm just a regular guy. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm focusing on. I'm doing both. I want to be of help, be of assistance to people, but I want to also make sure that it's really like I'm really going to be able to do that if it's something that is of interest to me, and if I have some sort of knowledge, some sort of expertise in that area, some sort of gift. And right now, that seems to be mainly the podcast and telling people stories and talking to other people and getting that. So that's where I'm focusing for the most part.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Christine. So it is Maya speaking again. So thank you so much, Thomas. As I said earlier, we're going to be putting all of your information in the chat and also sending it out. So folks, if you have more questions, I encourage you to follow Thomas. His podcast is great, as I said. So there's many more ways to get involved and chat with you. So thank you so much, Thomas.
Absolutely. Thank you all for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, so now we're going to go back into our small group breakouts from yesterday. And in an hour and 20 minutes, we'll be coming back here for a little yoga and meditation break. And then we're going to have a special closing ceremony with Dynasty. We're going to have some gift card prizes and a wrap up. Educators will be joining Shafiq in a special educator breakout session. Check your emails for the links for the small breakout rooms. If you aren't sure where to go, hang back and message tech support if you have questions about which Zoom room to go to. So we'll see you folks back here in an hour and a half-ish. All right.